In this video, we will create a very simple two-table database which will describe student classes relationship. Basically, we'll just keep track of students taking some classes. So it's pretty obvious that we're going to have a table about students and a table about classes. So let's create the very first one, which will describe students. So table 1, I'm going to make sure that it's in design view, name it students, and all the fields in this table need to describe a typical student. So every student who is taking classes in our college have some first name, they have some last name, every student has some email, they have phone number, they have address, they have date of birth. So basically we're creating fields that are going to describe a typical student, and every field that I have created will be serving as a record in the datasheet view. And now we need to identify the unique key, which is going to uniquely identify each record, also called a primary key. So I'm just going to call it primary key. And as you see, Access automatically designates the very first field as the primary key. So I'm going to change it to student ID. And I'm going to change order number to just a short text, because in some cases the student ID is not just numbers, could contain some letters, so that will allow us for that. Now I'm going to check what data types I'm going to have. The first name, short text for the last name, for email, that will serve as well. Date of birth should probably have a date and time data type. So now I'm going to save it, and I'm going to create second table. I'm going to move it to design view, and this is going to be our classes table. And this table will contain information about a typical class. So every class will have some subject. Basically, it's something like CIS class, or English class, or history class. So the subject. Each class will have a level, and this is like 101, 205, and so on. Let me just change this. Each class will have some date that it begins on. So I will call it start date. Every class will have end date. We'll have some times, like takes place every Tuesday at 10 a.m., for example. Every class will probably have an instructor assigned to it. And now we need to figure out what's going to serve as our primary key. And so again, this needs to be a unique identifier for every separate record in this table. So it can be the subject, it can be the level, because we have multiple classes under CIS, for example, or under 101. So the unique identifier for this table I'm going to select as section number. Section number is going to be unique for each class, so it will serve as well to designate it as a primary key in this table. Section number, and I'm going to say it's primary key. Now I need to look at the data types. So section number usually contains just numbers, so I'm going to change it to number. Subject short text, level is usually just numbers. Again, I'm going to change it. The start and end date, date and time data type. Okay, time's just going to be short text, and instructor going to be short text. Perfect. So now I'm going to save this, and now we can look at under database tools in the relationships. We can populate those two tables and see how they are related to each other. So this is basically the skeleton of our database. These are two tables that comprise the database. And when we look at it, it becomes obvious that, one student can take many classes. So what we want to create here is one-to-many relationships. And to do this, we will just take the primary key from the students table, student ID, and add it to the classes table. Because student ID in no way describes classes, it becomes foreign to this table when you move it, and it's called foreign key. So to do this, I'm actually going to go to classes, go to design view, and add student ID here, and this is going to be my foreign key. Now, one thing you obviously need to look for is that you have to have exactly the same data type for the foreign key as it has in the other table as a primary key. If you have different data types, you will not be able to link those tables. So I'm just going to save this, and now I'm going to click on student ID in the students table, and while keeping my mouse button pressed, I'm just going to hover over student ID in classes table, and this brings up the edit relationships dialog window. And so we have student ID selected in students class and in classes. In students table and in classes table. I'm going to click on enforce referential integrity and click create. So again, if you look at this join at this relationship, I'm just going to click on edit. You see that we have relationship type as one-to-many. So you know that we have one-to-one, we have many-to-many, but in this case, we're choosing one-to-many relationship, which means that one student can take multiple classes. And you see number one here and infinity sign over here. All right. So now I can close this. I want to save it. And now I can start populating data. So I'm going to open my students table. And now you see that the fields we have created in the data sheet view, which is very similar to Excel view, they are basically becoming the headers of the columns. So once we fill information in one line, in one row, this becomes a record about one student. So let's say we begin with like 1000. The first name is Mary. The last name is Brown. Email is Mary at gmail, let's say .com. We have some phone number. We have address, we have date of birth. Now, because we selected date of birth as a data type, date and time, you have this little icon where you can actually select the date. So let's say they were born on December 1998. Okay, so now we have the first record in our database, which contains information about Mary Brown. So we can input the information about classes that Mary takes through the classes table, or we can add it by using the relationship we have created. So I can click on this plus sign over here and add the information about classes through the students table. So let's add the section. Let's add the subject. For example, it's English 101. The start date was, let's say, it was sometime in March. The end date, let's say it's going to be in May. The times, let's say it's every Tuesday from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. The instructor is black. And so now I have actually populated information about the student in the classes table. So if I close this table, which allows to push the information in the other table, and open classes, now you see that instead of it being empty, you already inputted the information about student whose ID is 1000, which is, if I open my students table, I see that that's Mary Brown. So this is basically how you create a simple two-table database, and you can keep adding information about other students. For example, student 1001, and this is going to be Joe Little with his email, with the phone, and so on. And you can add the information about Joe through the same way, clicking on this plus, adding what section he is taking, subject, for example, like this, the start date, the end date, and so on. And again, if I want to look at the information that is being populated in the classes through the students table, I can see that I have already 2 records populated in this table.